right now, I mean, literally at this exact second, millions of students around the world they're spending thousands of hours, right? And often going into massive life-altering debt to do something that, linguistically speaking anyway, guarantees them absolutely nothing.
Nothing at all. It's wild.
It is. And welcome to the deep dive, by the way, because today, you, our listener, you're actively engaged in learning right now just by being here with us. But how often do we actually stop to examine the very language we use to describe how we learn?
Almost never, I'd say.
Yeah.
We treat education like this giant machine. You put the raw material in.
Right, the student, the time, the tuition money.
Exactly. You feed all that into the machine, and you expect this shiny, perfectly educated product to just, pop out the other side. But if you actually look at the language we've naturally developed over centuries to talk about this process, well, it quietly admits that the machine is entirely flawed.
It's built on a foundation of total uncertainty. And that's our mission for today's deep dive. We've got this really fascinating linguistic ladder to climb today based on some incredible source material. We're going from really basic foundational A2 vocabulary concepts all the way up to some seriously heavy socioeconomic critiques.
Yeah, it's quite the journey because it's not just about linguistics. We're getting into the psychology of intelligence, the flaws of modern teaching, and frankly, a massive critique of the whole university system.
Exactly. So whether you are currently pulling your hair out, studying for a massive exam, or maybe you're trying to pick up a new language, or even if you're long out of school and just, navigating the corporate job market, understanding these concepts is going to fundamentally change how you view your own intelligence and your own educational history, honestly.
Oh, absolutely. And I think we really have to start at the foundational level, right? Separating the physical act of studying from the actual results.
Yes. Because there's this linguistic trap from the text that I think, pretty much all of us have fallen into at some point. Mostly because other languages actively encourage it. We conflate the act of showing up with the act of succeeding.
Right. You're talking about the vocabulary of testing. It's incredibly revealing when you break it down.
It really is. Break that down for us, because in a lot of languages, it's just one idea, right?
Yeah. In many languages, if you translate the phrase for, literally sitting down in a room, gripping a pen and filling out a piece of paper, it translates directly to, I passed an exam.
Which is crazy.
It is. The language itself just merges the physical presence of the student with a successful outcome. The two things are identical.
But English doesn't let you get away with that at all. It forces this really harsh, kind of sobering separation between the physical action and the eventual result.
It does. In English, you don't pass an exam just by showing up. You take an exam. Or, if you're using British English, you sit an exam.
Right, I'm taking my math exam on Friday. It's purely physical. It's just an action.
Exactly.
It says absolutely nothing about whether you're going to get an A or an F.
Nothing at all. It forces you to acknowledge the risk involved. You're undertaking a task, sure, but the outcome is completely pending. It's a chronologically separated event. The result, passing or failing, happens much later. And it's completely out of your hands once that paper is turned in.
That separation, whenever I think about that, it always makes me think of buying a lottery ticket.
Oh, that's interesting. How so?
Well, you don't walk into a gas station, hand over $2, and walk out yelling, I just won the lottery.
Right. Well, hopefully not. Or you're setting yourself up for some severe disappointment.
Exactly. You'd look insane. You say, I'm playing the lottery, or I bought a ticket. You've performed the physical action of entering the game. You're in the arena, but you can't claim victory. You can't say you passed until those numbers are actually drawn. Taking an exam is essentially just buying the ticket.
Okay. I like the analogy, but I think I'd push back on it just slightly.
Oh, fair enough. Go ahead.
Because a lottery is, it's pure unadulterated chance.
Right.
An exam, theoretically anyway, it's supposed to be a measure of preparation. It's supposed to measure merit.
Keyword being supposed to be. But doesn't it often feel exactly like a lottery?
Sometimes, sure.
Because think about it. You study 10 chapters of a textbook, and the professor only puts questions about 2 of them on the test. If it happens to be the 2 you know best, you win. If it's the 2 you skimmed because you ran out of time, you lose. There is a massive element of chance in standardized testing.
Okay, yeah. That's a very fair point.
Okay.
And it perfectly highlights why that linguistic separation from the source text matters so much. It underscores a pretty brutal truth about education effort does not guarantee acquisition. You can perform the action flawlessly. You can sit in that uncomfortable plastic chair, stare at the clock, fill out every single multiple choice bubble with a number 2 pencil, and still completely fail. The action of taking the test and the outcome of passing it are entirely disconnected realities.
Which honestly brings us to what I think is the most tragic linguistic distinction in this entire discussion.
The difference between studying and learning.
Yes. This is the crux of so much modern educational anxiety. Like, study is just the action.
Right. It's the attempt to understand. It's the physical process. Reading the textbook, highlighting your notes in 5 different colors, making hundreds of flashcards.
It's the 3 a.m. coffee jitters in the university library while you're staring at a screen. That is studying. It's entirely about the input of effort.
But learn is the result. Learning only actually occurs when that information is synthesized, retained, and secured in your brain.
Right, in a way that you can actually retrieve it and use it later.
Exactly.
And I think we've all lived the nightmare of this exact sentence, right? I studied for 6 hours last night, but I didn't learn a single thing.
It's a devastating realization. You put in the time, but the transaction failed. And yet, look at how our society is structured. We actively, consistently confuse the two concepts. We reward the appearance of studying.
Oh, 100%.
We praise children for sitting quietly at their desks for 6 straight hours a day. We measure the time spent in the classroom, the hours logged. But time spent studying is, at best, a metric of obedience. Or maybe endurance.
Right.
It is absolutely not a metric of learning.
It's totally an Industrial Revolution mindset, isn't it? We treat studying like punching a clock at a factory. Like, if you stand at the assembly line for 8 hours of physical work gets done. You can see the widgets.
Yes, the widgets are produced.
But the human brain doesn't work like a Ford assembly line. You can't just stare at a page of advanced calculus and expect the knowledge to be magically manufactured in your brain simply because you put the required hours in.
Precisely. And when we build an entire educational infrastructure on the assumption that time spent studying automatically equals knowledge acquired, we are setting students up for profound psychological distress.
Because the language itself warns us it doesn't work that way.
Right. We're telling them the educational process is this clean, guaranteed transaction. Put in the coins, get the soda. But the vocabulary shows us it's precarious. It's uncertain.
And when that precarious system breaks down, like when a student genuinely puts in the effort to study, but the learning just isn't happening, the language we use to describe that failure gets really interesting and honestly, a little bit aggressive.
You're referring to the phrasal verbs from the text, specifically the concept of falling behind.
Right. I mean, just think about the imagery of that phrase. I was out sick with the flu for a week, and now I've completely fallen behind in chemistry. It instantly turns the whole concept of education into a literal physical foot race.
It's a deeply evocative idiom. It implies this tight pack of runners moving relentlessly forward at a completely standardized pace. The syllabus is the pacemaker.
Mm-hmm. The pace is set, no exceptions.
Exactly. And if you, for whatever reason, maybe illness, a learning disability, or honestly just needing a little more time to digest a complex concept, if you lose your stride, the distance between you and the rest of the pack immediately starts to grow.
Because the class isn't going to stop and wait for you. The syllabus marches on, which means the psychological debt you owe to the system, it compounds every single day you aren't at the front of the pack.
And that leads to the necessary and often incredibly exhausting counteraction, catching up.
Even just saying it makes me tired.
Because once you fall behind, you can't just resume the normal walking pace to rejoin the group. Because they are still moving forward. You have to sprint. You have to exert double, sometimes triple the effort just to reach the baseline level of your peers.
Right, like I have to give up my entire weekend to study so I can catch up. It's draining your reserves just to achieve the basic status quo of the classroom.
This entire cycle, falling behind, panicking, and then sprinting to catch up, this is where the true grinding anxiety of the modern student lives. And it exposes the scientific absurdity of the traditional classroom model.
How so?
Well, it assumes a uniform pace of cognitive development for 30 entirely different human minds simultaneously.
Which is completely insane when you actually say it out loud. Like, if you put 30 adults in a conference room and tried to teach them a complex new software program, some of them would get it in 10 minutes.
Sure, the tech-savvy ones.
Right. Some would need 3 hours. And some would literally need someone to hold their hand and walk them through it step by step over a few days. And we accept that. We just say, oh, that's normal adult variation.
You wouldn't judge them morally for it.
Exactly. But with kids, if they don't understand fractions by Tuesday at 2:00 p.m., exactly like the syllabus dictates, they've fallen behind.
And we absolutely frame it as a personal moral failure. We don't say, oh, the curriculum moved faster than this student's natural cognitive processing speed for this specific subject.
Right. We say they aren't trying hard enough. We blame the runner, not the completely arbitrary pace of the race.
It's a very harsh linguistic environment.
Okay, let's look at a slightly more forgiving phrase from the text, because not all of these linguistic quirks are quite so punishing. What happens when you aren't currently in the race, but you realize a skill you used to have has gotten a bit rusty?
Then we use the phrase brush up on.
I'm going to Mexico next month, so I really need to brush up on my Spanish. I actually really love this phrase. The imagery is so comforting compared to the pure panic of falling behind.
It is. Brushing up implies that the foundational learning, that actual acquisition of knowledge we discussed earlier, was successful. The knowledge hasn't evaporated.
Right. It's just sitting in the attic of your brain, kind of gathering dust.
Exactly. You don't need to rebuild the entire house from scratch. You just need to take a brush, sweep away the cobwebs, and polish it until it shines again.
It's this really nice acknowledgement that human memory isn't perfect, but that your past effort wasn't wasted. It's a jumpstart.
Unfortunately, society's patience for brushing up is usually reserved for hobbies, right? Or adult learning. When we look back at the rigid, standardized structure of formal education, the language takes a very dark turn when a student decides they can no longer maintain the pace of that pack.
Oh, yeah. Dropping out.
Yes, the ultimate cessation of the journey. The term for when a student leaves school entirely before finishing their degree or course.
Okay, I really want to dig into this one because society treats dropping out as this monolithic, catastrophic tragedy. Like, it's the ultimate boogeyman. Do your homework or you'll become a dropout. It's used as a noun to permanently label a person's entire worth. But is that actually accurate based on the text?
Well, in traditional pedagogy, it's absolutely viewed as the ultimate failure. It represents a total breakdown of the educational contract. The institution failed to retain the student, and the student failed to complete the requirements. It's lose-lose.
I get that that's the traditional institutional view, but let's play devil's advocate here because reality is far more complicated. And the source text brings up the exact same two examples that always get brought up whenever this is debated. Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg.
Right. Two of the wealthiest, most influential human beings on the planet who both famously dropped out of Harvard.
It's the classic counter-narrative. If the system strictly defines dropping out as a failure, how do we reconcile that with immense world-changing success? I'd argue that dropping out isn't always a failure to keep up. Sometimes it's a massive glaring signal that the student has completely outgrown the confines of the system.
That's a vital distinction to make. For a certain tier of visionary, or honestly even just highly pragmatic non-traditional learners, the structured pace of a university is a hindrance. They aren't falling behind the institution. The institution is falling behind them.
Exactly. I mean, imagine Mark Zuckerberg sitting in his dorm room in 2004. He's literally in the middle of writing the code for a platform that is going to fundamentally alter human communication globally.
Right.
And the university is essentially telling him, hey, stop doing that. You need to go study for a midterm on 18th century European history so you can pass. If he had stayed to pass that test, Facebook might not exist. He dropped out to engage in actual high-stakes learning.
We do need to be very careful with survivor bias here, though, which the text also hints at.
Fair point.
The Gates and Zuckerberg examples are extreme outliers. We use them to romanticize the idea of the rogue genius. But we can't ignore the reality of the statistics. For every tech billionaire who drops out because the system was too slow for them, there are thousands of students who drop out because the financial burden became crushing.
Yeah, that's true.
Or they lacked foundational academic support, or they had to work 2 jobs just to feed their families and simply couldn't keep sprinting to catch up.
That's entirely fair. The tragedy isn't the act of dropping out itself, right? The tragedy is when a student is forced out by systemic inequalities, rather than choosing to step out for a better opportunity.
Exactly. But your underlying point is crucial. The term dropout carries a societal stigma that paints all departures with the exact same brush. It completely flattens the nuance of the human experience. It assumes the institution is flawless, and the departure is entirely the fault of the individual's lack of grit.
When the reality might be that the institution's method of measuring grit or measuring intelligence is completely arbitrary to begin with, which transitions us perfectly into how we actually measure the mind.
Right.
When you're in the system and you're just trying not to fall behind, how do you actually prove to the institution that you're smart?
Linguistically, we have a very specific phrase for this, and it reveals a lot about the illusion of competence. We talk about learning something by heart.
Oh yeah, memorizing something completely word for word, reciting a poem or a list of historical dates or a really complex physics equation.
But think about the subtle irony of that idiom, learning by heart. We don't say learning by brain or learning by mind.
Why is that? Why the heart?
Well, historically, in a lot of ancient cultures, the heart was often thought to be the seat of intelligence and memory, not just emotion. But in modern usage, learning by heart has taken on a slightly mechanical flavor.
Yeah, it really has.
It's rote. It's the ability to regurgitate information without necessarily comprehending it at all.
I see this constantly. Like, a student can write out a massive, complex physics equation on a whiteboard. They memorize the sequence of all the variables perfectly. But if you stop them and ask, okay, but what does this equation actually mean in the physical world? How does this apply to the structural integrity of the bridge we're driving over right now? They freeze.
Because they possess data, not knowledge. It's essentially an acoustic or visual parlor trick. They've memorized the shape of the symbols, not the fundamental laws of nature those symbols actually represent.
And yet, our testing system massively rewards this exact parlor trick. If you can regurgitate the data perfectly onto the page, you don't just pass, you pass with flying colors.
Achieving a perfect score. Total, unquestionable victory.
Yeah. The imagery behind flying colors is so dramatic. It's naval history, right?
Yes, it originates from the age of sail. A victorious warship returning to its home port would fly its colors, its national flags and pennants, from the masts to signal that it had won the battle.
Wow.
A defeated ship, on the other hand, would return with its colors lowered, or, it might not return at all.
It's deeply militaristic. The student has survived the brutal battle of the exam hall, and they are sailing back to the dorms with their GPA flags flying high.
Exactly.
But it begs a massive question. If a student can achieve this triumphant victory, if they can pass with flying colors solely by learning by heart, without any actual deep understanding of the subject, what exactly are we celebrating?
We are celebrating compliance. We are celebrating the student's ability to perfectly mimic the required data set under intense pressure.
We're celebrating the illusion of intelligence, and I think deep down society knows this. I really do. I think we collectively recognize that passing a test doesn't actually mean you're competent in the real world.
What makes you say that?
Because if we truly believed that test scores equaled survival skills, we wouldn't have created a completely separate category of intelligence to describe people who actually know how to navigate life.
You're talking about the great societal dichotomy. Book smart versus street smart.
It is wild how deeply entrenched this binary is in our culture. Like, it's everywhere.
Let's define the archetypes from the text.
Yeah.
The book smart individual is the master of the syllabus. They thrive in the structured, predictable, highly regulated environment of academia.
Right.
They have the PhD, they read the dense literature, they pass with flying colors.
But the stereotype, and it's a brutal one, is that this same brilliant academic doesn't know how to change a flat tire. They can't read a room, they don't know how to de-escalate a tense conflict at a bar, and they will get completely taken to the cleaners if they try to negotiate the price of a used car.
Because the rules of negotiating for a used car are not written in a textbook. The environment is chaotic. The variables are human, they're deceptive, and they're constantly shifting.
Right. Contrast that with the street smart archetype. This is the person who maybe didn't even finish high school. Maybe they're one of those dreaded dropouts. But they can run a highly successful small business.
Mm-hmm.
They have an incredible intuitive sense for reading people's motivations. They know how to hustle, adapt, and survive in a completely unpredictable environment.
They rely on experiential learning, which is the exact opposite of rote memorization. They learn by doing, by failing, and by adapting in real time.
I mean, I understand why we have these terms, but I have to aggressively question why we treat them as mutually exclusive. Why do we force this binary? It feels like we use these terms mostly just to box people in or even to insult them.
It's a cognitive shortcut. Human beings love binaries because they simplify a complex world.
Right.
But you're right, it's very often weaponized. Calling someone just book smart is absolutely used as a pejorative out in the real world.
And it implies a sort of helpless naivete, like, oh, he's book smart, bless his heart, but he wouldn't last 5 minutes in the real world.
Right.
And conversely, why do we assume that the street smart survivor who runs a local plumbing business couldn't also sit down and excel at analyzing classic literature? If they were simply given the time and the environment to do so.
We assume it because acknowledging that someone could be both is honestly quite threatening to the established social order.
Oh, elaborate on that.
Well, this binary reveals a deep underlying societal resentment. Think about it. Society builds these massive, incredibly expensive, prestigious academic institutions. We are told from birth that gaining entry to them and passing their exams is the ultimate goal. The academic elite are handed the keys to the kingdom.
Right. The credential is everything. It opens all the doors.
But then in the gritty reality of daily life, the working class, the people actually keeping the physical infrastructure running, they harbor a deep, often justified skepticism of the academic, who can theorize about macroeconomics but can't balance a local city budget. We worship the academic credential, but culturally, we romanticize the street-smart rogue who bypasses the system entirely.
It's like we know the system is a game. We know that being book smart often just means you're really good at playing the academic game.
And that realization that being good at school doesn't necessarily make you good at life is the perfect bridge to the philosophical core of our discussion today. Because if learning things by heart to pass tests doesn't translate to practical understanding, then something is fundamentally structurally broken in how we are being taught.
Which brings us to the big guns, the overarching theory of education itself. We're moving past the individual student's experience now, and we're looking at the architecture of the system.
The term for this, as outlined in our source material, is pedagogy.
It's a heavy word, pedagogy. It sounds intimidating.
It literally just means the method and practice of teaching. But historically, it was viewed as a profound philosophical pursuit. It wasn't just about figuring out the most efficient way to cram facts into a child's head. It was about shaping a human mind. It was about developing citizens.
And the absolute holy grail of good pedagogy is the development of critical thinking.
Critical thinking is the objective analysis and evaluation of an issue in order to form a judgment. It requires skepticism, logic, and the ability to synthesize multiple, often conflicting viewpoints.
I've always heard it distilled down to one simple mantra, which I think is just perfect. Critical thinking is teaching a person how to think, not what to think.
That is the absolute ideal. But the reality of modern education presents a devastating contrast. Genuine critical thinking has been systematically replaced, or at least heavily marginalized, by our old friend, rote memorization.
Right, and rote memorization is basically just the institutionalized, industrialized version of learning by heart. It's the mechanical repetition of information without any requirement to understand the underlying concepts whatsoever.
And this is where we have to ask the hard question: why? Why would a system abandon the teaching of critical thought in favor of robotic repetition?
Because it's efficient. I mean, It is so much easier to grade a standardized multiple choice test than it is to grade a nuanced original essay.
Exactly. Rote memorization scales. You can test millions of students globally using the exact same metrics and algorithms. Critical thinking does not scale easily. It requires time, debate, and highly subjective evaluation by a human teacher.
I want to try an analogy here because I think the tragedy of this shift really needs to be visualized.
Okay, let's hear it.
Think about rote memorization like training a robot to paint by numbers.
Okay, I'm with you.
You give the robot a canvas, and the canvas is covered in thousands of tiny microscopic zones, and each zone has a specific number. And you program the robot with a key. If you see a 4, use the blue paint. If you see a 7, use the green paint.
Right.
The robot's arm moves incredibly fast. It never makes a mistake. It fills in every single zone flawlessly, and at the end, it produces a perfectly coherent picture of a beautiful landscape.
So it passes the test with flying colors.
Exactly. It gets an A+ app. The execution is mathematically flawless. But here's the problem. The robot has no idea what a landscape is. It doesn't know what a tree is. It feels absolutely no emotion regarding the contrast between the green and the blue. It possesses zero actual understanding of the image it just created.
Because it only understands the algorithm of the numbers.
Right. And most importantly, what happens if you take away the numbered guide? What happens if you hand that robot a blank canvas and say, paint me something beautiful?
Well, the robot paralyzes. It throws an error code. It completely shuts down. It cannot function without the preordained instructions.
Yes, it's completely paralyzed. True critical thinking, on the other hand, is like teaching an artist how to mix their own colors from primary pigments. It's teaching them about light, about shadow, about the complex geometry of perspective. You teach them the principles, you hand them a blank canvas, and they can paint something that has never ever existed before in the history of the world.
They can adapt.
They can adapt to any canvas, any lighting condition. They can solve a novel problem.
That is a phenomenal analogy, and it strikes at the absolute heart of the crisis highlighted in the text. When an educational paradigm sacrifices genuine critical thinking in favor of rote memorization, it produces a generation of graduates who are incredibly adept at passing standardized tests, but who are completely incapable of solving novel problems.
And the real world is entirely composed of novel problems.
Precisely. The real world doesn't hand you a multiple choice sheet when a global pandemic hits, or when a massive supply chain collapses, or when your entire business model is suddenly disrupted by a new AI technology. There's no answer key.
We are essentially manufacturing millions of robots who are brilliant at painting by numbers, and we are handing them incredibly expensive diplomas to prove it. But when they enter the chaotic, street-smart world where the numbers suddenly vanish, they freeze. They have immense amounts of data stored in their heads, but they lack the analytical engine to process it into actionable wisdom.
So we have to confront a very uncomfortable reality. If millions of students are spending years of their lives and mortgaging their financial futures just to pass standardized tests through rote memorization without developing the ability to critically evaluate a novel problem, what is the actual tangible value of the degree they receive at the end?
Man, that is the million-dollar question, literally in some cases, and it pushes us out of the philosophy of the classroom and straight into the brutal reality of the macroeconomy.
We are entering the territory of credentialism.
Credentialism. So this is the concept that the modern job market relies almost entirely on formal qualifications and academic degrees as the ultimate measure of a person's intelligence or their ability to do a job.
It is an over-reliance, honestly bordering on an obsession. It's the assumption that the piece of paper is a perfect proxy for the person.
If you have the paper, you are deemed competent by the HR software. If you lack the paper, you are instantly filtered out into the digital trash bin. It doesn't matter if you have 10 years of street-smart, practical experience, no paper, no interview.
It is the ultimate victory of the proxy over the reality. The degree was originally intended to be a shorthand, a quick way for an employer to gauge that a candidate possessed a certain baseline of knowledge.
Right, a time saver.
But society has become so obsessed with the proxy that we completely ignore the reality of the individual's actual capabilities. The map has entirely replaced the territory.
And when everyone realizes that the piece of paper is the only way to get past the gatekeepers, well, everyone rushes to get the paper, which leads directly to a massive systemic economic issue. Degree inflation.
Just like monetary inflation, where printing too much money devalues the currency, degree inflation occurs when an overabundance of graduates devalues the academic credential itself.
Let's trace the historical timeline on this, because the source material lays this out, and it really puts the current madness into perspective. If we go back, say, 50 or 60 years, a high school diploma meant something significant.
It did. A high school diploma signaled a rigorous baseline of literacy, numeracy, and general competence. You could graduate high school and walk right into a secure, entry-level corporate office job. You could start a career, buy a home, and raise a family based entirely on that single credential.
But then the system pushed a narrative. To really get ahead, to distinguish yourself, you need a college degree. So millions of people rushed to get a bachelor's.
And as the market flooded with bachelor's degrees, employers realized they could use the degree as a new filtration mechanism. Suddenly, that exact same entry-level office job doing the exact same mundane tasks no longer accepted a high school diploma. The barrier to entry was arbitrarily raised.
And the job didn't get any harder. The required credential simply inflated.
Exactly. And the cycle didn't stop there. As bachelor's degrees became ubiquitous, they lost their signaling power. They became the new high school diploma.
Which brings us to today. For that very same entry-level position, answering emails, formatting basic spreadsheets, managing a calendar companies are now demanding a master's degree.
It's an academic arms race. You now need 6 years of higher education and potentially tens of thousands of dollars in debt just to prove you are capable of doing a job that a 19-year-old with a high school diploma was doing perfectly well in 1975.
It's completely unsustainable. And the only people who win an arms race are the arms dealers. Which brings us to the darkest, most cynical, but perhaps most accurate conclusion of this entire deep dive: the commodification of education.
Commodification is the process by which something that was previously outside the economic market, like a public good or a fundamental human right or a pure philosophical pursuit, is transformed into a product to be bought and sold for profit.
We like to think of universities as these hallowed grounds, right? These pristine sanctuaries of critical thinking where scholars gather under oak trees to debate the nature of truth.
And perhaps, once upon a time, some of them actually were. But today, largely driven by the pressures of credentialism, universities are functioning exactly like profit-driven corporations.
If the university is a business and education is the product, that fundamentally changes the identity of the student, doesn't it?
It changes it entirely. The student is no longer a scholar. The student is a customer.
And they are a captive customer.
Precisely. Because of credentialism, the student must have the degree to survive in the modern economy. They cannot opt out without facing severe economic penalties. The university knows this. The banks offering the student loans know this.
So they can inflate the price astronomically. They are selling a product with entirely inelastic demand. If you need a master's degree just to get an entry-level job, you will pay whatever the university demands because the alternative is poverty.
The institutions are no longer selling the development of critical thinking. They are selling access to the job market. They are selling, quite literally, overpriced pieces of paper.
Wow. Let's pause and take a breath because I really want to reflect on the immense weight of the journey we've just taken. It's a lot to process for one deep dive.
It is a sweeping indictment of a system we rarely question.
Think about where we started an hour ago. We started by looking at a simple grammatical quirk. We talked about why it's incorrect to say I passed an exam when you just mean you're holding a pen and sweating in a chair. We were talking about basic verbs taking versus passing, studying versus learning.
The foundational blocks of the language.
Right. And from that tiny seed, from the simple realization that effort doesn't guarantee a result, we've climbed this incredible ladder. We looked at the emotional gauntlet of the student, the terror of falling behind, the exhausting, breathless sprint to catch up, and the heavy, incredibly misunderstood reality of dropping out.
We explored the psychology of intelligence, realizing that our obsession with learning by heart to pass with flying colors has created a false, deeply damaging dichotomy between being book smart and street smart.
We dug into the philosophy of pedagogy and realized that true critical thinking, teaching a mind how to mix its own colors, has been sacrificed to the industrial efficiency of rote memorization. We're building robots that can only paint by numbers.
And finally, we witnessed the macroeconomic fallout. How credentialism fueled degree inflation, resulting in the tragic commodification of education. Sanctuaries of learning have been transformed into corporations, selling overpriced paper to desperate customers trapped in an academic arms race.
It's a heavy, somewhat terrifying intellectual climb. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I don't want to leave you with just doom and gloom. I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over on your own. It builds on this terrifying concept of degree inflation, but it looks a little further down the road into the future.
Where does the inflation end?
Exactly. If we are truly in an educational arms race, and the degree is acting just like inflated currency, then we are looking at a classic economic bubble. And what do we know about bubbles?
Eventually the math stops working. They burst.
They burst. If a master's degree is the new high school diploma today, what happens in 20 years? Will companies demand dual PhDs just to pour coffee in the break room? That is mathematically, socially, and financially unsustainable.
The system will collapse under its own bloated weight.
So, what happens when it bursts? Will the sheer astronomical cost of these overpriced pieces of paper become so utterly absurd that major corporations simply stop asking for them?
It's a fascinating hypothesis.
Yeah.
A complete paradigm shift back to the beginning.
Think about it. Will society pivot entirely away from the academic credential? Will we revert back to valuing raw, practical ability? Will the street-smart survivor, the artist who knows how to adapt, how to hustle, and how to actually solve a novel problem instead of just reciting memorized data, will they become the new gold standard of the global job market?
If the map becomes too expensive to buy, people will eventually have to learn how to navigate the actual territory again.
I love that. It challenges the very foundation of why we study, and more importantly, why we learn. We build our entire lives around this machinery of education, but we rarely look at the gears. I hope today we helped you see the machinery of your own mind and the systems around you a little more clearly. Keep asking questions, keep challenging the syllabus, and keep thinking critically. You know, there is this incredibly specific, almost universal feeling of helplessness that I think, well, nearly every single person listening to this has experienced at least once.
Oh, definitely.
Imagine this scene, right? You are sitting on that stiff, crinkly paper that covers a doctor's examination table.
Ugh, the worst.
Right. The room is just a little too cold. It smells faintly of rubbing alcohol and, sterile wipes.
Yeah.
And you feel absolutely undeniably terrible. Your body is just screaming. Then the door swings open, the doctor walks in, pulls up a stool, looks at you over their clipboard, and asks what seems like the most simple, basic question in the world.
Let me guess. What seems to be the problem today?
Exactly. What seems to be the problem, and suddenly your brain just entirely empties.
Total cognitive flatline. I mean, the vocabulary just completely evaporates.
It really does. You feel awful. You're living it. But trying to actually translate that visceral physical reality into words that another human being can understand, it suddenly feels like you're trying to describe a color you've never even seen before.
That is a perfect way to put it, yeah.
It is so incredibly frustrating. And honestly, when your body is failing you, lacking the right words isn't just an annoying brain fog, It can actually be quite dangerous.
Well, it is a state of profound vulnerability.
Yeah.
Because when we are sick, we are already stripped of our normal defenses.
Right.
We are exhausted, we are in discomfort, our biological resources are just depleted.
Running on fumes, literally.
Exactly. And right in the middle of that depletion, we are tasked with this massive cognitive burden. I mean, we have to become simultaneous translators of our own biology.
Oh, wow. Simultaneous translators, I like that.
Yeah, because you have to take an entirely internal, invisible, subjective sensation and somehow package it into objective language.
Right, which is so hard.
It is. And if we get that packaging wrong, the professional sitting across from us, the person whose literal job it is to help us, might completely misunderstand the nature of the emergency.
And that very specific translation problem is exactly what we are going to unpack today.
I'm very excited for this one.
Me too. So, for this deep dive, we have a really fascinating piece of research to go through. It's essentially a linguistic breakdown that looks at how we talk about health, fitness, and wellness.
Right.
But what makes this text so compelling is the framework it uses. It actually examines our vocabulary through the lens of language learning.
Specifically, the standard European scale for English proficiency.
Right, exactly.
Right.
And for anyone who might not be a linguist or, an ESL teacher, this is that scale that starts at A1 for an absolute beginner, moves up through the B levels for intermediate speakers, and tops out at C2.
Which is that complete, nuanced, master-level fluency.
Yeah. And using that framework for this topic is just so brilliant.
It really is a brilliant conceptual framework, because what the author is doing here isn't just giving us a dry vocabulary lesson. We aren't going to sit here reciting flashcards.
Please.
Yeah. Right. Instead, this research uses that ladder of language proficiency to explore how our entire society relates to the concept of physical and mental health.
Right. We start at the A2 level, which is the foundational literal level, like just the basic grammar of describing physical pain.
But by the time we reach the end of this deep dive, ascending to that C2 master level, we are going to be standing at a philosophical summit.
Oh, absolutely.
The author actually takes us through an incredibly sharp critique of modern psychology, the multi-trillion-dollar wellness industry, and
the commodification of emotion.
Yes, how our actual emotional states are being commodified. It's intense.
It is quite the ride. We are literally going from figuring out how to say, "Doc, my head hurts," all the way to analyzing the argument of, "Doc, modern society is alienating me from the authentic human experience."
It scales up so quickly.
It does. And the goal here is that by the end of our time today, you, listening right now, will not only have a much sharper toolkit for communicating with your doctor, but you might just walk away with a brand new lens for analyzing how our culture treats human emotions.
Which really requires a shift in perspective.
Yeah.
There's an old linguistic theory that language actually dictates how we perceive reality.
Right, the Sapir-Whorf stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. The idea that the vocabulary we have access to shapes the actual boundaries of what we can understand. So, the author's premise here is that when we change the language we use to discuss our bodies, we fundamentally alter our relationship with our own humanity.
Okay, let's start at the very beginning then. The literal foundation.
The A2 level.
Right, the beginner's hurdle. And the text points out that the absolute biggest trap for anyone trying to describe discomfort, and honestly, this goes for native English speakers who are just panicked in an ER just as much as someone learning the language, is confusing three very specific words.
The big three.
The big three: hurt, pain, and ache.
And medical professionals hear these used interchangeably and incorrectly all the time.
I'm sure I've done it.
Oh, we all have.
Yeah.
Which, as we mentioned earlier, creates a lot of diagnostic muddy waters right out of the gate. But the research breaks this down beautifully by looking at the underlying grammar.
Because the grammar reveals the function, right?
Precisely. Let's look at the word pain first. Grammatically, pain is a noun. It is a general feeling or a condition that you possess.
Okay.
You have pain, or you feel a sharp pain in your arm.
I see. So it's a thing you hold. But wait, I feel like I've heard people try to use it as a verb when they are really distressed.
Like what?
Like someone might want to say, I am paining, to show that it's an active, ongoing process.
Right, yeah. People attempt that because they want to convey the urgency of the action. But linguistically, that's a misuse. Pain is the object. It is the overarching category of distress.
Got it.
Now, contrast that with the word hurt. The text notes that hurt functions entirely differently. It is primarily a verb.
Or sometimes an adjective, right?
Yes, or an adjective. But as a verb, this is where the agency of the sentence shifts completely. If your arm is the problem, the arm itself is the thing doing the action to you.
Right.
You say, my arm hurts.
You do not say, I have a hurt in my arm.
Exactly. Because hurt pinpoints the active location of the distress. The body part is the actor, and you are the subject receiving the action.
Oh, that's really interesting.
The text actually argues that this is psychologically significant. You are isolating the malfunction to a specific geographic region of your body.
Okay, and then we have the third word, which is ache.
Right.
And how does the text differentiate an ache from a pain? Because, I mean, in casual conversation, if my back hurts, I might say I have back pain or I have a backache pretty interchangeably.
They are definitely similar, but ache is highly specific. It is a noun that describes a continuous, dull discomfort.
So not a sharp stabbing feeling.
Exactly. It is not sharp. It is not sudden. It is a lingering baseline state of distress. And linguistically, the author points out that it is almost uniquely used as a suffix attached directly to a body part.
Oh, right. Like headache, stomachache,
Backache, toothache, exactly.
Let me make sure I'm really grasping this because the distinction feels crucial, but, easily tangled.
Go for it.
The text makes it clear that confusing these three is a huge problem in a medical setting. So if we use an analogy, it's kind of like a car mechanic trying to diagnose a broken down vehicle.
I like this.
Confusing hurt, pain, and ache is like a customer not knowing the difference between a slow tire leak, a shattered windshield, and an engine that just fell completely out of the car.
Yes.
If I bring my car into the shop and just yell at the mechanic, my car is doing a bad thing, I haven't given them anything to work with.
Nothing at all.
They have to waste an hour just figuring out what broad category of bad thing we are even dealing with.
That analogy tracks perfectly with the author's point. Medical professionals need you to isolate the sensation. If you blur these lines, the precision is just lost.
Right.
And in medicine, precision is the difference between a swift, accurate diagnosis and a prolonged, potentially dangerous mystery.
The research actually provides a sort of idealized role play to show how this works when a patient puts it together perfectly.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Imagine I walk into the clinic, I sit down and I say to the doctor, I feel terrible today. My throat hurts every time I swallow. I have a headache. And I feel a lot of pain in my muscles.
If a doctor hears that exact phrasing, they instantly have a roadmap.
Right.
And what the text finds so fascinating here is why this distinction matters so deeply on a psychological level, not just for the medical charting.
How so?
Because by categorizing our distress linguistically, we actually start to manage it psychologically. When you say, I feel pain in my muscles, you are giving the doctor the overarching systemic category.
Okay.
Pain alerts them to a whole body issue. It could be viral, it could be inflammatory.
You're giving them the wide shot.
Yes, the wide shot. Then when you say my throat hurts, you are pinpointing the active, acute location of the distress. You are saying, look exactly here, this specific mechanism is malfunctioning.
Ah, so you've given them the close-up.
Exactly. And when you say I have a headache, using that specific noun for a dull, continuous discomfort, you are defining the specific quality and texture of the distress.
It's like you are handing the doctor a very specific set of GPS coordinates.
That's a great way to put it.
You aren't just crying, ouch. You are giving them the latitude, the longitude, and the elevation of your suffering.
Precisely. You are translating the subjective terror of being sick into objective, actionable data. But as the research transitions into the next level of fluency, it poses a really interesting problem.
Which is?
Identifying the pain and isolating the sensation is only step one. A static description is just a photograph.
But illness isn't a photograph, it's a timeline. It's like an entire movie.
Exactly. Once we know what is wrong, the natural next step in human communication is to describe the process.
Right, like how did we get sick?
What is happening to us right now? And how are we planning to get better?
Okay, so precise nouns and verbs fix the immediate emergency room crisis. But if I want to explain that this illness didn't just appear out of nowhere, but has been, creeping up on me for days, I need a different set of tools.
You do.
The text maps this out as the B1 level, the builder level of language. And this entire section is dedicated to phrasal verbs.
Ah, phrasal verbs. Those tiny 2 to 3 word combinations that native speakers use absolutely effortlessly.
But which completely change the meaning of the root verb.
Right. They are notoriously difficult for language learners.
And the author shows how we use these specific little phrases to map out an entire medical timeline. So let's look at the beginning of the timeline, the onset of the illness.
Okay.
The research highlights the phrase, come down with. You come down with a cold. You come down with a stomach bug.
Notice the directional nature of that phrase, come down with.
It's incredibly physical. It really implies gravity.
It does.
You are literally being pulled downward by the sickness. You are standing upright, functioning normally, and this invisible force has dragged you down into a lower state.
And then the text moves us to the crisis point of the timeline.
The scary part.
Right. If an illness is very severe, or if environmental factors overwhelm your system, like, say, being dehydrated in a really hot, crowded room, you might pass out. You lose consciousness entirely.
You are out. You are removed from the active situation.
It is the ultimate loss of control.
Yes.
You have gone from being pulled down to being completely removed from the timeline. Your brain literally hits the kill switch.
But assuming you survive the crisis, we move to the resolution phase.
The upward trajectory.
Yeah. The text says that when you are recovering, the standard phrase is that you get over an illness. You had a terrible flu, it took 2 weeks, but you finally got over it.
Yes.
And lastly, for the prevention phase, to avoid getting sick in the future, we work out at the gym.
Work out. Exerting force outward.
I found the author's analysis of this part so interesting because when you look at these 4 phrases together, come down with, pass out, get over, work out, they actually map out a miniature hero's journey.
Oh, I love that connection. Walk me through it.
Think about it. First, the hero is pulled down into the underworld. You come down with something. The forces of nature are working against you.
Right.
Then you reach the absolute rock bottom of the journey, the abyss. You pass out. Total defeat.
The darkest hour.
Exactly. But the hero has to rise again. You don't just recover. I mean, that sounds incredibly passive. The language demands that you get over the illness.
Like a physical barrier.
Yes. It paints the sickness as a literal physical wall in front of you, an obstacle, and you have to climb over it to survive and return to the normal world. And then how do you prepare for the next battle? You work out. You train your body.
The author makes a very compelling case that this action-oriented language reveals something fundamental about the human psyche. It reflects our innate desire to control our health narrative. When we use these specific phrasal verbs, we aren't just neutrally acknowledging that some microscopic virus has replicated in our bloodstream.
Right, that would be too clinical.
Exactly. We are framing the biological process as a literal battle. We are casting ourselves as protagonists in a struggle.
Okay, wait, let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
Does everyone really want to be cast as a hero battling an illness? I mean, isn't it sometimes just a relief to surrender to being sick? To just say, I am ill and let someone else take care of you? Sometimes the idea of having to battle a cold just sounds exhausting.
That is a very valid critique, and it actually reinforces the author's underlying point about societal pressure.
How so?
Well, the text suggests that our language actually forces us into this combative posture, whether we want it or not. The cultural expectation in the English-speaking world is stoicism and resilience.
Stiff upper lip and all that.
Exactly. Look at the stark contrast the author highlights between the extreme vulnerability of passing out, where the body completely overrides the mind and takes you offline, and the proactive, deliberate strength of working out, where the mind dictates terms to the body.
I'm going to lift this weight. I'm going to run this mile.
Yes. We use these combative phrases because society expects us to assert agency over our biology. We are expected to be the ones acting rather than the ones being acted upon.
So society literally demands that we conquer the illness, which is why getting over a flu feels like a moral victory, not just a biological process running its natural course.
Exactly. It's tied to our sense of worth. But the research points out a massive blind spot here.
Oh.
As great as these action verbs are for describing the events of an illness, major plot points like getting sick, passing out, and recovering, they're entirely inadequate for everyday life.
Right, because most days, you aren't fighting a heroic battle against 104-degree fever.
Exactly.
Sometimes you just have a weird, ambiguous lack of energy on a random Tuesday.
Yes. The action verbs map the timeline, but they completely fail to capture the atmosphere. For that daily, nuanced psychological energy, literal language falls short. We need metaphors.
Which brings us to the next phase of the author's analysis. Let's look at how we talk about our health when we aren't at the doctor's office, but rather when we are just trying to navigate the workplace or a social gathering.
The B2 analyst level.
Right. This is where we abandon literal medical terms entirely and start using vivid idioms.
And the author suggests that society requires a certain level of decorum here. We need ways to signal our physical state to our coworkers or acquaintances without oversharing explicit medical details.
Nobody wants to hear about your mucus at the water cooler.
Exactly. It's about managing social friction.
So let's run through the idioms the text highlights because they are incredibly revealing. Say you have a minor illness, you aren't in crisis, you don't need an ambulance, but you definitely need to stay home from the office. You say you're feeling under the weather.
Under the weather. It's such a fascinating phrase historically. It originates from maritime sailing, where 6 sailors would literally go below deck under the weather to recover from seasickness.
Oh, I had no idea. That makes so much sense.
But functionally today, the author notes how it externalizes the illness.
It's so polite. It's almost a gentle way to say, please stay away from me. I might be contagious, without making it sound gross.
It also shifts the blame. You aren't saying your immune system failed. You are suggesting the atmospheric conditions temporarily subdued you. It's a culturally acceptable way to tell society, I need a break, without inviting invasive questions.
Right. Nobody asks for a stool sample when you say you were under the weather. They just say, oh, feel better.
Exactly.
Now, what about the complete opposite end of the spectrum? If you are in robust health, you are perfectly healthy, strong, full of energy. The text uses the example of an 85-year-old grandfather who exercises every day. The idiom here is fit as a fiddle.
Fit as a fiddle. A fiddle being a violin, of course.
Which is a genuinely weird comparison when you stop and think about it. I mean, why a fiddle? Why not fit as a horse or fit as a brick wall?
The text explores this, actually. A stringed instrument only works when it is perfectly tuned and held under exact constant tension.
Oh.
Right. If the strings are too loose, it fails to make sound. If they are too tight, they snap.
That is so true.
The idiom implies precision, tuning, and being in a state of optimal readiness. It paints the healthy human body as a finely tuned instrument capable of producing energy on demand.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And then we have the space between those two extremes, the state of gradual recovery. If you are getting better day by day, perhaps after a surgery or a major illness, the idiom is that you are on the mend.
On the mend. Think about the root of that word.
It makes me think of fixing a torn shirt or like cobbling a broken shoe.
Yes.
But my absolute favorite idiom from this section of the text, the one that I think captures the modern human condition perfectly, is the phrase we use for total exhaustion.
Oh, this one is great.
When you are pushing yourself way too hard, you are working too many hours, sleeping too little, and basically surviving entirely on iced coffee and anxiety, you say you are running on empty.
The ultimate mechanical analogy.
Yes, I love the mechanical analogy of running on empty. It explicitly compares the human body to a car that is entirely out of gasoline, but the engine is still somehow turning over.
It's terrifying when you really picture it.
You are trying to operate your life on fumes. There is no actual fuel left in the tank, but you are still pressing the gas pedal to the floor. It is such a vivid, almost stressful picture of modern burnout.
What the author's doing here is incredibly sharp. They are using these idioms, specifically mend and running on empty, to highlight a massive paradigm shift in how humanity views itself.
A shift away from nature, right.
Exactly, because to mend literally means to repair an inanimate broken item, a shoe, a fence, a machine part. And running on empty explicitly compares us to a combustion engine. Yeah. The text argues that this reveals a very specific, deeply ingrained societal mindset. We view our bodies as machines. We no longer see ourselves as organic beings. We see ourselves as vehicles that require maintenance, tuning, and fuel.
We aren't organic gardens that need nurturing. We are mechanical engines that need optimizing.
Precisely. The Industrial Revolution didn't just change our economy, it changed our metaphors. It changed how we conceptualize our own biology.
Okay, let's pause and map out where we are because this is a massive shift.
It is.
We've gone from the very beginning of this deep dive, where health was just a basic, literal state learning how to point and say, my arm hurts, to this middle ground where we view our bodies as complex machines that need constant repairing and refueling.
Right.
And that perfectly sets up the massive sociological question the author tackles next. Because if society views the human body as a machine that can be tuned, optimized, and upgraded, what happens when society realizes it can commodify that optimization?
What happens when health stops being a baseline human right and starts being a premium product?
Exactly. We are entering the C1 and C2 summit of our source text now. We're zooming all the way out from the individual patient in the doctor's office to examine the macro-level impact of what modern society has done to the very concept of health.
The big picture.
Yeah. The author takes a hard look at how physical and mental well-being have been transformed into luxury commodities.
And the research lays out a fascinating historical contrast here. Historically, if we look back even just a few decades, health had a very simple binary definition.
Sick or not sick.
Exactly. It meant the absence of disease. If you didn't have a raging fever, if you didn't have a broken bone, if you weren't actively coughing up blood, you were considered healthy.
You were fine.
Right. The baseline was zero. As long as you weren't in the negative, you went to work and lived your life.
Nobody was waking up feeling fine and thinking, but am I optimally fine?
Exactly. But today, the text argues, our culture is dominated by something entirely different. The author calls it the wellness industrial complex.
The wellness industrial complex? That sounds incredibly imposing, like a military term.
Well, the author uses that term deliberately to highlight its pervasive, almost inescapable power. They describe it as a massive, multi-trillion-dollar industry.
Trillion with a T.
Yes. This is the economic engine that sells us crystal healing therapies, $5,000 silent meditation retreats in Bali, incredibly extreme restriction diets, and specialized, unpronounceable supplements that promise to hack your cellular aging.
And what does the author identify as the core mechanism of this industry? Like, how does it actually work?
The author argues that the core deception of this complex, the brilliant, insidious marketing trick at the heart of it all, is that it convinces us that wellness is no longer a natural state of being.
Okay.
Instead, wellness has been redefined as something we are obligated to buy.
Okay, wait, let me challenge the author on that for a second,
Sure.
because this sounds like a very cynical anti-capitalist critique. I mean, is the wellness industry purely predatory? On the flip side, hasn't this cultural shift also destigmatized a lot of really important things?
Like what?
Well, we actually talk about mental health now. We focus on preventative care instead of just waiting until we have a massive heart attack to go to the hospital. We understand nutrition better. Doesn't the text acknowledge any of the positive shifts that come from people caring more about their well-being?
That is the exact pushback many critics have against this kind of sociological argument. It's absolutely true that destigmatization and preventative care are massive public health victories.
Right.
However, the author's counter-argument is that the wellness industrial complex has co-opted those genuine victories and twisted them for profit. The text posits that the industry didn't just promote health, it shifted the goalposts of human existence entirely.
What do you mean by shifting the goalposts?
The author argues that the industry defined wellness not as the absence of being sick, but as an elusive, elite, ever-receding state of ultimate optimization.
Oh, I see.
You can never just be okay. You have to be thriving. You are never fully well because there is always another retreat you haven't attended, a new superfood powder you haven't incorporated into your smoothie, a new daily biohacking protocol you haven't mastered.
So it's a game you literally cannot win.
According to the text, that is the business model. By framing health as a luxury state that requires constant, ongoing financial investment, the industry ensures that we are always the consumer. We are always lacking something.
Wow, that makes me think of the old saying, health is wealth.
Oh, definitely.
It used to be this quaint proverb that just meant being healthy was the most valuable thing you could possess, more valuable than gold. But looking through the lens of this author's critique, it feels like health is wealth has taken on a much more literal, almost sinister meaning.
How so?
Health no longer equals wealth. It feels like, according to this text, health now requires wealth.
That is a very astute synthesis of the author's point. And the text notes a really dark irony here.
What's that?
In our pursuit of this highly commodified version of health, The industry ensures we are perpetually running on empty. We are exhausting ourselves, working longer hours, stressing over our finances, just trying to afford the expensive cures for the exhaustion that our jobs caused in the first place.
It's a snake eating its own tail.
Yeah.
We run ourselves into the ground to make the money, to buy the premium retreat, to recover from the burnout of making the money. It's madness.
The author certainly views it as a brilliantly designed cyclical trap. But the research doesn't stop at physical health.
It goes deeper.
It does. This raises an even more profound question that brings us to the final section of the text. The wellness industrial complex doesn't just want to control our physical diets, what we eat, how we exercise. It actively attempts to control our emotional diets as well.
From physical products to emotional control.
Exactly. And according to the author, this leads to a much darker psychological crisis, which brings us to the absolute peak of our deep dive, the C2 master level.
The philosophical summit. This is where the text analyzes the deep psychological damage caused by this modern wellness culture because, as the author argues, it's not just demanding physical perfection, it is demanding unnatural emotional perfection.
Right.
And the text identifies two massive cultural forces that the industry uses to enforce this. The first one is a concept called toxic positivity.
Toxic positivity. It is a phrase that has gained a lot of traction on social media, but the text rigorously defines what it means in a sociological context.
Okay, how do they define it?
Toxic positivity is the cultural pressure to maintain a happy, optimistic mindset, regardless of how objectively painful, difficult, or devastating a situation is.
It's the good vibes only bumper sticker, but applied to serious life events.
Precisely. The author gives a very grounded example to illustrate this. Imagine you lose your job unexpectedly.
Okay, terrifying.
Right. You are rightfully stressed about your mortgage, you're anxious about the future, and you are feeling a sense of depression and loss. Toxic positivity is the cultural force that swoops in and tells you, don't be sad, just smile and manifest a better job. Everything happens for a reason.
Ugh. I have a visceral reaction to that phrase. Everything happens for a reason. When you say that to someone who is genuinely hurting, you aren't actually helping them process their reality.
Not at all.
You are just demanding that they stop making you uncomfortable with their pain. But let me ask you, or rather, let me ask the text. Isn't optimism generally a good survival trait? Why is the author labeling it toxic?
The text distinguishes between natural resilience and enforced toxic positivity. Resilience is acknowledging the pain and working through it. Toxic positivity, the author argues, actively invalidates genuine human suffering.
Oh, I see the difference.
What the research points out is that the wellness industry weaponizes this forced optimism. Under this paradigm, negative emotions are no longer treated as natural, healthy responses to hardship. Instead, they are framed as personal failures.
So if I'm sad that I lost my job, the culture tells me I'm failing at being well.
Exactly. If you are sad, the implication is that it's not because a sad thing happened to you, it's because you failed to consume the right self-care products, or you failed to have the correct gratitude journaling routine, or you failed to protect your peace.
Feeling bad literally becomes a moral failing. You are punished for grieving.
Yes, and the author argues that this weaponization of happiness works hand in hand with the second massive sociological crisis identified in the text. A phenomenon they call the medicalization of normalcy.
The medicalization of normalcy. That is a very heavy academic phrase. How does the text define it?
The author defines it as the societal process, where perfectly normal, everyday human experiences, things like grief, passing sadness, shyness, or even just the natural biological process of aging, are suddenly labeled as medical diseases.
They apologize.
Exactly. And because they are now suddenly categorized as diseases or disorders, they supposedly need to be cured.
And let me guess how you cure them.
With expensive medications, endless therapies, or premium wellness products.
I am incredibly struck by this concept. It makes me think about how we calibrate our expectations of life. Let me try an analogy here to see if I'm tracking the author's argument.
I'd love to hear it.
The medicalization of normalcy feels like, well, it's like having a fire alarm in your house that has been calibrated to be so incredibly absurdly sensitive that it goes off every time you boil water for pasta.
An over-calibrated sensor.
Right. Grief, occasional sadness, getting tired, these are just the steam of a normal human life. They are inevitable byproducts of living and caring about things.
Yes.
But modern psychology and the wellness industry treat that steam like the house is burning down. The alarm is screaming and they are rushing in with fire extinguishers, or in this case, expensive cures, to put out a fire that doesn't exist. The scheme isn't a disease, it's just what happens when water boils.
That analogy perfectly captures the text's critique. The author argues that this overcalibration represents a profound alienation from our own nature. If we synthesize these two concepts that the text presents, toxic positivity and the medicalization of normalcy, we arrive at the author's ultimate thesis about modern life.
Which is?
By enforcing toxic positivity, our society demands a state of permanent, unnatural happiness. We are told that emotional equilibrium is a failure, that only peak joy is acceptable.
Which is biologically impossible. You cannot sustain peak joy any more than you can sprint a marathon.
It is entirely impossible. And then, by medicalizing normalcy, society turns natural human variance. The simple fact that we sometimes feel blue, the fact that we grieve losses, the fact that we get nervous in large crowds, into a pathology that must be eradicated.
Right.
Driven by the profit motives of the wellness industrial complex, the author concludes that these two forces combine to alienate us from the authentic human experience. We are no longer allowed to experience the full, messy spectrum of being human without feeling like we need to buy a cure for it.
So let's pull all of this together. We have come on an incredible journey today, tracking the exact progression outlined by this research. When we started, we were all the way down at the A2 level, talking about the simple, literal grammar of physical discomfort.
Right.
We were learning the rule that pain is a noun and hurt is a verb. We were figuring out how to give a doctor the exact GPS coordinates of a sore throat.
The localized, objective expression of distress.
Right. And then we moved up a level to map out the timeline of getting sick, looking at the phrasal verbs like coming down with a bug and getting over a flu. And the text showed us how that language reveals our cultural desire to be the heroic protagonists of our own health narratives, battling against the odds.
Then we explored the idioms of human energy at the B2 level.
Yeah.
The social lubricants like under the weather, and those highly revealing mechanical analogies like running on empty, which exposed the historical shift where we began viewing our bodies as machines requiring constant optimization.
And finally, we dismantled the machine entirely. We climbed to that C2 philosophical summit to look at the author's searing critique of the multi-trillion-dollar wellness industrial complex.
We really went there.
We did. We examined the argument that the industry weaponizes toxic positivity to make us feel guilty for being sad, and how it medicalizes normalcy, treating the steam like a house fire just to sell us cures for perfectly ordinary human emotions. We quite literally started with, "I have a headache," and we arrived at a profound critique of human alienation.
It really highlights the central thesis of the text. The incredible power of language. The words we use don't just neutrally describe our reality, they actively shape our reality.
Yeah.
The author leaves us with the warning that the vocabulary of wellness has been co-opted to sell us an impossible, expensive ideal.
Yeah.
So looking at all this research, I would offer a challenge to you, the listener.
Okay, let's hear it.
Do a mental check-in today. Think about the language you use to describe your body and pay close attention to the language used against you by advertising and culture. Have you ever felt pressured by toxic positivity to smile through a moment of genuine pain?
Good question.
Have you ever felt targeted by the wellness industry, feeling like you were inadequate because you couldn't afford to buy a cure for a perfectly normal human emotion? Recognizing the linguistic trap, as the author suggests, is the first step to escaping it.
That is a brilliant challenge to end on. And I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your week. It builds on everything we've unpacked from this text today.
Okay.
If this cultural machine continues to pathologize our normal sadness, if it continues to turn happiness into an elite commodity that we have to purchase, how long will it be before we entirely lose the vocabulary to describe a perfectly ordinary, beautifully imperfect day?
A day where we are neither fit as a fiddle nor passing out, but simply existing.
Exactly. What happens when sitting in a room, totally unable to find the words to describe how you feel, isn't just an annoying problem at the doctor's office anymore, but becomes the default state of our entire emotional lives?
That's a heavy thought to leave on, but an important one.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the language of our bodies. Thank you for keeping your mind sharp and exploring these heavy concepts with us today.
It has been a pleasure. Stay well out there.
And more importantly, stay authentic. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.